How I scan slides at home with my Nikon Z6 II. My heart sank when I pulled out the first slide and saw how badly it had faded. Time was taking its toll on my father's photographs. Images of people and places in the US, UK, Italy, Guatemala. Some date back to the 1940s. That site set me off on a mission to preserve and restore whatever I could of those memories. I made mistakes. I wasted days. Eventually, I learned 5 lessons about scanning slides. If you skip any of them, it could cost you painful amounts of wasted time and effort. Digital slide scanning is macro photography, so you need a bunch of stuff to help you do that. You need a camera. I use a Nikon Z6 II. It's good, but a higher megapixel count like the 45 megapixels of a Z7 would be even better. You can do this with a DSLR, but a mirrorless camera is way more convenient. An electronic screen with a live view makes getting exact focus and exposure way easier. Truthfully though, the camera is almost the least important part. Lens. My choice is a Sigma 105mm macro lens on an FTZ adapter to take the images. You could also use extension tubes, bellows, or a reversing ring. Anything that gets you to 1:1 magnification with a flat focal plane will work. But a dedicated macro lens is far more convenient. Autofocus is a little bit helpful for someone like me whose eyesight is not the best, but it's not at all necessary. You need something to hold the film. I use an essential film holder to hold the slide. The important thing here is to have something that will hold your slide in the right place between the camera lens and your light source. I tried using a pane of glass, but it constantly got dirty and created reflections. The purpose-built essential film holder was a good buy. Light. Choosing your light source for scanning is critical. You need a light with a high color rendering index, CRI, for accurate colors in the final image. Given its proximity to the film, you also want one that doesn't generate a lot of heat or UV that could damage the original. Flash is an option, but it makes it more difficult to align, focus, and get even illumination. I've seen people use an Apple iPhone set to a white screen. That can work, but they're not super bright. I find a small continuous LED light designed for video work to be the best. Whatever you choose, you need diffusion so that the light is evenly spread across the image. The essential film holder has diffusion built in. Next, you need a stand. You'll want a sturdy tripod or copy stand that securely holds your camera and allows fine position adjustments. Mine is an iron pipe bolted to a tabletop. I use a quick release ball head on a super clamp to hold the camera in place and a bubble level to align the camera with the film. A focusing rail would probably be helpful, but I haven't bothered to get one. Next, you need something to scan. I'm scanning 35mm color slides because I have a lot of them. You can also scan a color or black and white transparencies of different sizes, and negatives too. For negatives though, post-processing is a bit more tricky. If you'd like to hear about that, I'll have to make a separate video. Cleaning supplies. There's no point scanning dirty slides, so you'll also need cleaning supplies. A rocket blower, camel hair brush, lint-free swabs, and cleaning fluid. I like PEC 12, which is a mixture of ethanol and N-butyl acetate, or 99% isopropanol. Do not use water. Physical storage. Once you've cleaned and scanned your slides, do not put them back in that dusty old shoebox. If you want to preserve them, you need suitable storage for your cleaned and scanned slides. I've used both acetate sleeves and boxes. They both have their advantages. Sleeves make it easy to view the slides, but annoying to access them, and they take up more room than boxes. Boxes take less space and less fiddling around. When I'm scanning a bunch of slides, sleeves slow the process down a lot more than you might think. Archival storage isn't cheap, but if you want to preserve your collection, it's a must. You also need digital storage. If you're going through the trouble of scanning a collection of slides, scan at the highest resolution you can and save the images in RAW format. This takes up space. I pay Adobe for a terabyte of cloud storage via my Lightroom subscription. It's worth it, but don't forget to make backups too. That's a lot of stuff, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's all useless unless you set it up properly. So let's do that next. Lesson 2. How to set it up. Environment. First, pick a place to work. Don't neglect the environment you're working in. It must be as clean and dust-free as you can make it. film attracts dust and lint really well. It's extremely frustrating to scan a bunch of slides and then find they're dusty or have hair across them after you've already imported the images. It's even more frustrating to clean a bunch of slides and then find them immediately hairy under the lens because your room is dusty. Setup. I have my camera mounted on a tripod ball head fastened to a super clamp, which is on a vertical pole fastened to a tabletop. So I can point the camera downwards towards the film holder, which sits on the light, which is on the tabletop below. I fasten the light down with tape so it won't move. Otherwise, the whole thing tends to move around and I have to adjust it after every shot. Next, you need to make sure the camera is at the right distance and aligned with the film plane. I'm using a full-frame digital mirrorless camera, which means I need 1:1 magnification to fill the sensor with the slide image. Since my macro lens is only capable of 1:1 at closest focus, I have to be pretty careful about adjusting the camera distance from the slide. If it's too close, you may not be able to focus, or you may cut off part of the original image. If it's too far away, you won't take full advantage of the sensor size. You'll lose megapixels. Finally, the depth of field is very shallow for a macro lens focused at 1:1. If you don't align the film plane parallel to the slide, one side of the image might be out of focus while the other side is fine. I use a bubble level to make sure the film holder and tabletop are level, and then I check that the camera is also level. This ensures that the film and the sensor are parallel. All right, we got our stuff set up. So we can start scanning now. Right? Not so fast. Now let's take a step back for a moment. There's a really important question you have to ask for yourself, and that's about project planning. Lesson 3. How many slides do you have? Are they pretty clean or really dirty? Are they properly organized and stored? How long is this going to take? Can I batch parts of the process? Which ones? You need a plan. Organization. The last thing you want is to take a couple days off, then come back and realize you've lost your place. If you're archiving images, it may be important to preserve the original order of the collection. If you mix them up, it may be impossible to restore that original order. Organization is key. Batch workflow. I break the process down into 4 major steps. Step 1, clean, scan, and store. Step 2, import, profile, crop, and rotate. Step 3, QC and sorting. And step 4, final edits and tagging. I found this process helps me get more done reasonably efficiently without losing my place. Staying on track. If you have thousands of slides to process, like I do, it may take many scanning sessions to finish the project. I, admittedly, am not very good at being consistent. I tend to act in bursts of energy. This makes it even more important to maintain the organization so that I know where I left off if I come back to it after a month or more. Generally, I'll batch scan a bunch of slides, import them to Lightroom. Then the post-processing can be done at my leisure because I can do it from any of my computers. Lesson 4, scanning. So you've got your gear, it's set up in a comfortable, clean work environment. You got a fresh card and batteries in your camera, and good. Now, before you open the slides, clean your room. Remember, dust sucks. Okay, now we can get started. On the physical side, I avoid mix-ups by only working on one slide at a time. Take it out, clean it, scan it, place it back into archival storage before picking up the next one. This ensures I don't mess up the order, and it doesn't give newly cleaned slides time to pick up more dust. Cleaning the slides. Clean the slide before scanning. Any grime, dust, or lint on the slide is going to be obvious in the final scan. So it's important to make sure this slide is as clean as you can get it before shooting. A rocket blower removes any loose stuff. I may clean dirty slides with a liquid cleaner and a non-scratching lint-free swab. I like PEC 12, a mixture of ethanol and N-butyl acetate, or 99% isopropanol. Then you need to capture the image. When capturing the photo, I aim to get the highest quality, lowest noise, sharpest photo I can get. There's a few important steps and a balance of settings to optimize. First is exposure. I want the lowest ISO setting I can get, typically ISO 100, unless I'm worried that my shutter will be too slow. On my Nikon, I'm happy to go up to ISO 800 if necessary. Aperture. In case my alignment is not quite perfect, I like to use an aperture of f8 to get a bit more depth of field. It's not much. Be careful. Shutter speed. If I was using flash, this wouldn't matter much, but because I'm using a continuous light source, motion blur is a real possibility. I want the fastest shutter I can get given the available light. So I turn my light source as bright as it'll go and select a shutter speed that the camera meter says will give me proper exposure. I white balance the camera based on the source light. If you have a color calibration slide, it'd be a great idea to grab a frame of it for your scanning session. I shoot the frames in RAW to give me the most editing flexibility, but it's still important to grab a baseline for white balance and color. Older slides, especially, may have color shifts that I'll want to correct in post. To avoid motion blur, I want the whole setup to be as still as possible. I don't need to worry about mirror slap because my Nikon doesn't have a mirror, but I do want to avoid touching the setup. Even pressing the shutter can blur the image. So after I check the focus, I trigger the camera with a wired remote shutter release. After I get the frame, I put that slide into an archival storage box. Lesson 5. Post-processing. Post-processing consists of several steps: import, profile, rotate, crop, quality check, sort, exposure, color, retouch, and tag. After scanning, I import the batch of digital images into Lightroom. I find it helpful to have dedicated albums called Inbox, Editing, and Finished so I can keep track of what I've already done. After taking the photos, I import all the raw images from my camera to an album in Adobe Lightroom. I use a new album for each scanning session or collection. I bulk apply the standard camera profile and rotate any images if needed. Then I quickly crop each image down to just the slide, taking off any of the slide's frame that might be visible. Next is the quality check. One by one, I check that the image is in focus, aligned, and not dirty. If the scan is bad, I'll mark that image as rejected by pressing X in Lightroom, so I'll know to retake that frame in my next scanning session. If the image is good, I'll hit Z to pick it. If it's just a bad slide, I'll leave it unmarked. After I've retaken any scans that need fixing, I delete the bad scans and profile, rotate, and crop the new ones. At this point, depending on the image, I might be done. If I want to do further editing for color, exposure, or retouching, I'll move the batch to the editing album. Then I'll do further editing only on the picked images to fine-tune exposure, color, crop, and rotation, and retouch for blemishes. Next, I'll rate excellent or particularly meaningful pictures as 5 stars in Lightroom. Tagging. Finally, you get to the last step, tagging each image with any information you know about it. This may be the most painstaking part of the whole process after editing. When was it taken? With what equipment? Camera, lens, etc.? What settings? What kind of film? Where? Who took it? What's the subject? The image file itself will hold the metadata about your mirrorless camera and exposure settings, but that's misleading. That's just how you took the scan. You also have to capture information about the original. I usually put this kind of information in Adobe Lightroom's info section, often in the title or caption field. More than anything, missing this information for photos in an old collection is what I regret most. One pleasant surprise occurred to me. Once I had a bunch of slides scanned and edited, I found there were people and places in those pictures that I didn't recognize. Enter crowdsourcing. In Adobe Lightroom, you can share an album online and allow others to add comments. Sharing my collection with my extended family gave me a lot more detail about the collection and brought those memories back to them as well. For my collection, I'm not finished, but I've scanned a lot of film. The editing, arranging, and tagging is a process that may go on for years, honestly. At least I've taken steps to capture my old photos before they get any worse and properly store the originals. Fighting off time is a losing game, but I'm here for it. After all, that's a big part of what photography is all about.